All right, folks, this is Harris Sultan, and I've got a very special guest with me because I know you guys don't like to hear from me whatever I have to say on the Russia Ukraine conflict. And you always tell me that I should stick to criticizing religions because that's my forte. Okay, I'll take that. But I do have someone who does know more about this conflict than I do. I've got with me Jake Broe. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Harris. Great to talk
And
with you today.
it's my pleasure. So I've got loads of questions for you. I want to start off with your fundraiser. I believe you've done two fundraisers to help Ukrainian defenders defend their country from a mad tyrant who illegally invaded their country. How much money you've raised so far, and how does that actually help Ukrainian defenders?
Well, I've promoted and I've shouted out numerous fundraisers. I usually wait for the end of my videos, but official partnering, there's a group out of Estonia called the NAFO 69th Sniffing Brigade, and I've done three patch campaigns with them. A patch campaign is they're the ones who handle all the money, they're the ones buying and fixing up the trucks and delivering them. I'm just the PR person saying this group is reputable. It's okay for my audience to donate to them. I've done three of these campaigns, and all of them have gone over $1 million. The first one was for my birthday. This was back in May. I then did one for the 1,000 Days of War. This was launched in August, also went over 1 million. And then the most recent one, I'm just calling the Broe Christmas Convoy, and it just went over $1 million last week. So in total, because these things kind of just keep building even after I say we're done. In total for the entire year, 3.5 million raised for trucks and drones and other special equipment. This has been 90 trucks, thousands of drones, and once again, various other things like anything frontline units request that the guys in Estonia can purchase for them.
That's obviously very nice of you. And on that note, any money that's raised from this video, I will put that in to Jake's fundraiser. I believe you are probably looking to shut it down now because you have met your target. So if you can hold it out for another 4 or 5 days, that would be great. And I will, whatever money we raise from this video, I will match that. Of course, up to $1,000 only because I don't want to go broke. The number of casualties that Putin has inflicted on his own people. I believe, according to British intelligence, the number is around 700,000. Americans put it around over 500,000. A lot of pro-Russia or people who are soft on Putin, they think that these numbers are highly exaggerated. How do we know that the number is as high as 500,000, 700,000? Because these numbers are huge, especially given that the Soviet Union took in something like 50,000 casualties in Afghanistan, and that was the end of it.
The problem with counting, Ukraine counts everyone. So it's not how many Russian soldiers have been killed, captured, or wounded. It's how many men fighting for Russia have been killed, captured, and wounded. This counts mercenaries. This counts Syrians. This counts North Koreans. A couple Taliban guys have shown up. But the biggest group that I think confuses people are Ukrainians fighting for Russians, fighting for Russia. These are the people from the DPR and the LPR, Luhansk and Donetsk. Russia was in there for almost 8 years, Russifying and brainwashing these people. And I remember in the first couple weeks, they were mobilized and sent to the front, and then they were being captured by the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians were asking basically their own. These are Ukrainian citizens that were under Russian occupation, under these fictional governments of the LPR and the DPR. And they were told you had to sign up for the DPR and LPR militias to get any job. If you wanted to teach, after school classes, or if you wanted to work at the fire department, or if you wanted to be an assistant at a hospital, you could not get a job in the LPR DPR unless you signed up for the militias. This was the law for 8 years. And then when Russia launched their full-scale invasion, they mobilized these people and they sent them to the front. Ukrainians killing Ukrainians, that is a win-win by anybody who makes decisions in the Kremlin. So of this 500,000 casualties, how many of them are Ukrainian citizens from the occupied territories? And it could be as high as 100,000 or more. And then you have the prison population. The Wagner group with Prigozhin, they figured this tactic out first, but do you count those as Russian soldiers? Those are Russian prisoners press ganged into these Storm Z units, and they're just used as cannon fodder. They're not supposed to live. They're not supposed to survive. These are prisoners that nobody cares about. So you got to add that into the total. So, how many conscripts or contract soldiers or uniformed, mobilized Russian men have been killed, captured, or wounded? Well, that number's lower. It's still in the hundreds of thousands. But as far as the total casualties, what Ukraine and Western intelligence is counting, anybody fighting for Russia, add them to the list. And it's pretty horrendous.
Yeah, even if it's in hundreds of thousands of Russian men dying or captured or wounded, that these are still staggering numbers. How is Putin able to absorb all of that without any repercussions?
Well, he's a dictator. You don't, I mean, nobody in Russia has any say in their government. There's only one person making any decisions. He's the driving force. And at the moment, money. You want to sign a contract. There are provinces in Russia like Bryansk or Kursk where the sign up bonus is 3 million rubles. That's close to 30,000 US dollars. This is like two or three times the annual income of the average Russian on top of getting 2,000 a month. Now, 2,000 a month to me as an American, that's not worth fighting for and dying for. But if you're from Bashkortostan or some impoverished region of Russia in which you don't even have indoor plumbing, something absurd like 20% of Russians don't have indoor plumbing. Yeah, $2,000 a month is life changing money. And it's not just you saying, this is life changing money for me. I'm willing to go and fight. It's your parents, it's your wife saying, hey, we live in poverty. Why don't you go sign a contract? I'll take your paycheck. It's not the guy fighting on the front in Zaporizhia spending $2,000 a month. It's his kids, it's his wife, it's his parents. So Putin, there's a benefit being a dictator and keeping a large percentage of your population impoverished. So when you want to go to war, all you have to do is toss out a little money, and desperate people will roll the dice and think that they can somehow survive this war when your survival is not the priority of anybody in your military leadership chain of command.
Yeah, but that raises a question. Do Russian people know how dire the situation is on the front? Because if these wives or mothers are saying, hey, son, we're living in this poverty, why don't you go and fight? You'll be fine. Do they actually know how bad the situation is?
Some might not, but I think most do. Russians have internet, they have smartphones, they have Telegram. They've already gotten the reports from soldiers who have come home with their legs blown off, or they've lost their eyesight, or they can no longer walk. So everybody in Russia knows what's happening. And nationalism motivates them. Even if Putin is a dictator and this is a disastrous war, I'm still a patriot. I still love my country. I still want to put my country first. And they're tolerating it. At the moment, they're still willing to do this. This feels intolerable to me, how dire the situation is in Russia economically. Greater than 50% of the average Russian's take home pay is being spent just on groceries. Never mind healthcare, education, or taking a vacation. People in Russia are just trying to eat food and keep warm in the wintertime. What can you do? They feel helpless. The people of Russia know how bad it is, but they're Russians, and that's their country, and they're still willing to fight for their team and their side because I think they believed in Putin. I think Putin's popularity was genuine. The propaganda and all the antics that Putin has done over the last 24 years to endear himself to the people of Russia, to project this strongman image and talk about the decadence and the decaying nature of the West, it's persuaded a lot of people. They're there, they're believers. They know things are bad and they don't really understand what they can do to change the situation, but they're still signing contracts. They're still willing to go to the front lines and fight for the empire, to expand their borders and make Russia great again.
So there are Mara people there. So nationalism is one thing, but we've also heard that Putin hasn't purposefully mobilized people from Moscow or from St. Petersburg, because he doesn't want to revolt. Because when body bags start coming back to these big cities, then he might have a problem. So nationalism is good for rural people only.
No, I think the people of Moscow and St. Petersburg feel privileged. If you're living in Moscow and St. Petersburg and can afford to, more or less you're living in the top 10% of Russians. It's something called comparative deprivation. It doesn't matter how bad you have it, as long as you think you have it better than most people in your surrounding area. Why do the ruling elites of Pyongyang and North Korea support the Kim regime and fight to keep it going? And it's because they're in the top 10%. They benefit from the system. Even if they don't consciously want to think about it or realize it, they understand the politics and the nature of basically Russia just being a mafia state. Don't cross the wrong people and you should be fine. Keep your mouth shut and keep going to your government job, keep getting paid, and you can scrape on by and provide a decent, standard of living for your family. That's everyone's just out for themselves. There's yeah. I don't understand it. I don't think the average American would tolerate the amount of oppression and lack of freedom that the people of Russia have. You have no freedom of speech. You have no freedom of press. You don't have free and fair elections, and you're looking pretty bad these days, Russia. But once again, I think the average Russian is just in despair and they don't understand what's happening to them or how to change anything.
Yeah, it's quite ironic that most people in the West who simp for Putin actually complain about tiniest of censorships on them. What are your thoughts on Putin's grip on power? I've been hearing this for quite some time, and I think this is probably why a lot of people become skeptical of what we hear on social media or even in the mainstream media. Are the oligarchs going to dethrone Putin? Is there a resentment growing amongst them, or they're just too scared, or they're just waiting for the right moment?
Nope, nobody's going to. I mean, it's been 3 years. If somebody was going to rebel against Putin to preserve the state, it would have already happened. You could argue that's what Prigozhin attempted to do. And he had inside collaborators like General Sorovikin, who got reassigned.
Mm.
And Putin's been very careful. Dictators know this. If you want to remain in power, then nobody is allowed to shine brighter than you. I think I saw a clip on Russian state TV like 2 months ago of the Russian prime minister going to Mongolia or something. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know who this guy is. I've already forgotten his name. I've already forgotten what his face looks like. But this is supposed to be the guy who takes over if Putin, for example, were to die or be assassinated. And I don't know anything about this guy. This guy never talks. And this is something Putin has been very careful to do, to eliminate anybody that might look appealing as a replacement to him, because in a dictatorship, that's not allowed.
Mm.
And even when Putin had to give up power in 2008 because he was limited by term limits in the Russian constitution, he swapped himself out with Dmitry Medvedev, and Putin picked a person shorter than him, and Putin's not a very tall guy, and more kind of unappealing than him. And Dmitry Medvedev is a toad who was happy
Yeah.
to take that role. He served his 5 years and then loyally gave the presidency back to Putin. Russia amended their constitution, and now Putin can never leave. So anybody who has real competency or charisma that could potentially challenge Putin, Putin fires that guy, exiles that guy, kills that guy, arrests that guy, because he knows if there is a viable alternative to him and things get bad, people are going to look to that person for leadership. And no one's allowed to do that in a dictatorship.
All right, now let's talk about what's been happening in the West. Why do you think that so many people in the West actually have a soft spot for Putin? I know that there are a lot of social media propaganda channels like Jackson Hinkles and all these other clowns, but we can't just put it all down to these actors. There is a genuine longing for Putin. Putin would do something silly like he would say, "Oh, in Russia we respect the Quran," but on the other hand, we've seen how brutally he crushed the Chechen rebellion. And he would say that all those people in the West who are sick of wokeism, they can move to Russia. And then a lot of people saying, "Yeah, I'm considering moving there." This is a few months back. Why do you think that people in the West who have enjoyed liberties and democracy, and we've taken these things for granted, but at the same time, they idolize someone like Putin? What are your
That's a
thoughts on
co-
that?
that's a complicated question with different branches. I can go in different directions. The easiest one is just money. I mean, we have the proof that. I mean, Margarita Simeon on RT News is bragging how they have operations spread out all across the world. And the goal of Russia primarily is just division. Just get people in France to argue with each other and hate each other. Get people in Germany to argue with each other and hate each other. Get people in the United States to argue with each other and hate each other. Because if we're too distracted with our own internal politics, if we can't unify as a nation, then we can't stop or oppose what Russia is trying to do. So that's their primary objective: create noise, create chaos, get people exhausted just listening to the issues and the arguments. So Russia will argue both sides. They did this here in the United States with Black Lives Matter. It was exposed that Russian propaganda was pumping both Black Lives Matter narratives as well as Blue Lives Matter narratives. They don't care about the issues, they're not picking a side. They just want people to hate each other and fight. So they amplify the noise on social media and they just create division, that they view that as a win. So there's that aspect, but I think you want a more why do people emotionally gravitate towards Putin? And multiple layers to this. The first one is I think that some people just they like strongman politics. They want their leader to be their fighter, their champion, a tough guy who will take on the special interests or, the decadent elites or whoever. So Putin, how can anybody who wants to take on the decadent elites be championing basically the richest man in the world? Putin has been stealing the wealth of Russia for over 24 years, and he's got the super yachts, he's got the illegitimate children and mistresses. This guy bathes in deer antler blood because he thinks it helps him, you know, ward off aging. This guy is delusional because he has complete unchecked power in Russia, but it's intoxicating when you see or observe or meet powerful people. It happens in every country in the world. It's intoxicating. You become infatuated with them. It's easy to become a cheerleader and say, in my own life, I don't have a lot of control. In my own life, I don't have a lot of certainty. But there's this tough guy out there that doesn't take from anybody. And I like him. I like his style. I like his attitude. This is a human nature thing. Going back to, the earliest days of human civilization, you want the guy in charge of you to be strong, to be tough, because you feel like that is your best hope for survival in a chaotic world. So Putin has been projecting this narrative when he's not a tough guy at all. He's objectively a weirdo, and he's pretty weak. But kudos to him. He's achieved a lot over his 24 years in Russia, consolidating power, eliminating all rivals, murdering his opposition. It's abhorrent that anybody would cheerlead this guy. So, what percent of Americans like the Russians and like Putin and think he's a good guy? It's actually very small. When you poll Americans, are you more sympathetic towards Russia's arguments for this war? Are you more sympathetic towards Ukraine? Most Americans, something like only 4% of Republicans believe nonsense about Nazis in Kiev and biolabs and NATO aggression triggered this war. There's a legitimate argument to be had. We'll say the Russians are the bad guys, but why should American tax dollars, why should American weapons be helping Ukraine? That's the real debate happening in MAGA. Yes, there's people like Jackson Hinkle and even Tucker Carlson that are obviously pro-Russian narratives, but most Americans know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. It's just, do we have the political will or the interest to help? And I argue we do. Ukraine is, I think, a worthy recipient of our aid and support, and we should continue it.
Then in that case, wouldn't it have been more beneficial for Trump to actually appeal to that sentiment rather than appealing to this anti-Ukrainian sentiment, calling Zelensky a salesman, and basically riling people up against Ukraine and Zelensky.
Trump is the master at being vague because the world or America has accepted that he talks the way he talks. Like, objectively, the way Trump speaks is weird. He speaks at a very low speaking level, like a fourth or third grade speaking level, and he never gives a straight answer. He contradicts himself all the time. He openly lies. But Trump
But it gets through to
will
people, though.
It does. It does reach people. But Trump loves letting you project onto him whatever you want to believe. All the issues. People are saying, ignore what Trump says. This is what I think he's going to do. I just have a really good feeling on he's not going to deport 10 million people, or he is going to deport 10 million people. Trump would never support a national abortion ban, or he definitely will support a national abortion ban. He's said so many conflicting things to so many different audiences. There's so much confusion out there. People just adopt whatever they want, saying, I think he's going to do this. Now, once he becomes president, we're going to find out what he actually does do and doesn't do. You're asking, why doesn't he, if it's a popular opinion to support Ukraine, why doesn't he embrace it? And it's because he was in the opposition. I hate the team identity politics where if the other guy is in favor of it, it doesn't matter if it's a good thing. I'm just going to oppose it because I don't want anything positive or successful to happen while the other team is in power. So immediately, because Biden is the president, and Biden, when this war kicked off 3 years ago, Biden was going to stand for re-election. Trump and his base had to oppose him. They're not rooting for Ukrainians to die. That's too extreme. But if Joe Biden had successfully navigated this war and there was a resounding defeat for the Russians, and then Biden got to campaign on that for re-election, that would have hurt Trump's chances. So MAGA always instinctively just wanted to be in the opposition. When you look at the votes in Congress for military aid for Ukraine, it's almost every Democrat voting for it. But then with Republicans, it's like 50-50. Of that 50% of Republicans voting against military aid, how many of them genuinely believed we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine militarily versus how many of them just want to vote no against anything Biden and the Democrats say or do? And I think it's a very high percentage. I think a lot of people knew these appropriation bills were going to pass anyways. So just vote no, so that when I go back to my district, I can say I'm opposing those evil Democrats and Joe Biden is incompetent and he's screwing everything up and the world's in chaos. We need a strong leader. Bring back Trump. In a nutshell, the debate is really that stupid.
Is that why I've noticed a shift in your tone? Because before the last elections, you
There's a
were
difference between campaigning and governing.
okay.
When
You
you're
were
not in
campaigning
power,
clearly. Okay.
when you're not in power, you have no responsibility. In fact, if bad things happen, that's good for you because then you get to criticize the people, the Democrats or Biden in power. So yeah, it's shocking how fast the tone has shifted. I'm paying attention to Speaker Johnson and what he says. I'm paying attention to Trump and what he says. And now that they won, and MAGA is going to control all three branches of government, you still got the crazy people saying crazy things. Whatever, we can ignore them. But for the people who will actually have power and responsibility the next 4 years, they're now taking this serious. And they know the things they were able to get away with during the campaign season, they can't get away with anymore when they're actually receiving the Prime Minister of Canada at Mar-a-Lago, when the President of Poland is trying to get them on the phone. That stuff plays to your base. It doesn't play to your international partners. So this is the shifts. I mean, really, I was praying would happen. And I am seeing signs. And the best indicator is Trump taking this serious. He appointed retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg as his special envoy to negotiate between the Russians and Ukraine. General Keith Kellogg is a very serious individual. He's a competent person. He's old, he's 80, but he's got the connections, he's got the knowledge, he's got the intelligence. And Trump, this is brilliant. He doesn't have to talk about Russia and Ukraine at all. He can say, when Viktor Orban calls him or when Tucker Carlson wants to call him and talk about Ukraine, Trump can listen to them and say, yeah, that's great. I appreciate what you're saying. Go talk to my guy, General Keith Kellogg. He's the one handling this for me. And I guarantee you, General Keith Kellogg doesn't care or want to talk to Tucker Carlson, Scott Ritter, Jackson Hinkle, or Viktor Orban. Just being honest with you.
So was that Trump's master plan all along to appoint someone who knows what he's doing, someone like General Keith Kellogg, and just before the elections, he was going full crazy on Ukraine and leading us to believe that he's gonna put Ukraine in a bit of a trouble.
Well, there's plenty of us, Republicans in Congress who are very supportive of Ukraine. The chairman of the Armed Services Committee and the chairman of the Intelligence Committees. I think they're called the Four Mikes. Mike McCowell and Mike Waltz, who's going to be Trump's new national security advisor. So there's been very serious people who are MAGA. These people are full MAGA Trump supporters through and through. And then there's the crazy people that alarm me and things that they say and do. And Trump wants all of them to support him. So Trump stays ambiguous. And he was pretty ambiguous with all of his statements up until that one week where Zelensky visited that artillery factory in Pennsylvania with
Mm.
Bob Casey, who was running for Senate, and then Josh Shapiro, who might have been the VP. So I do think Trump was really angry that week. Speaker Johnson demanded the Ukrainian ambassador to America be fired.
Mm.
Uh, and at the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. But now, in retrospect, yeah, I do think that was a mistake by Zelensky. So Trump that week went off the rails, saying that Ukraine was destroyed, Ukraine was gone, Russia
Mm.
has killed everybody. So there was a couple speeches he gave in which he gave some bad sound bites. But up until that point, he was very careful, saying, "I'll end the war in 24 hours. This war never would have happened if it was me. We need to end the fighting. We need to end the killing." But I want to hope that Donald Trump understands that you can't end a war with just tweets. You do need um, generals and admirals and people who understand the Russians and understand war to actually find a resolution. He is trying to end the fighting and he does want a resolution. The broad debate now is, are there any terms that would be acceptable to both Russia and Ukraine to stop the fighting? And at the moment, they're not even close.
Okay, that leads me to my next question. So there's two schools of thoughts running around at the moment. One of them is that Putin doesn't want to end the war, and he's just going to reject any peace proposal from the Trump administration. And the other school of thought is that Russia is so depleted, Putin has sustained so many heavy losses, and his economy is going down, that he wants a way out, and he would take it. And this is why he's upped the ante. He's escalated the conflict, and he's trying to grab as much Ukrainian territory as possible before any peace negotiations begin. So I think you're of the opinion that he wants to keep going.
There's positives and negatives to both. If he freezes the war now, there's positives and negatives. If he keeps going and he just ignores whatever Trump says and he continues to push until he gets whatever he says his full objectives are, I personally think his full objectives are unattainable. Full period stop. He's saying he wants the administrative boundaries of Zaporizhia and Kherson. How the hell are the Russians going to get back across the river and take Kherson, which is a pre-war population city of 300,000 people? Like demanding that, if Putin is saying the war is going to continue until I get back to the other side of the river, that's just never going to happen, even if the United States cuts off all military aid. And then concerning the city of Zaporizhia, this is a town of 700,000 people. I genuinely don't believe General Keith Kellogg is going to seriously tell Zelensky, you got to give up a city of 700,000 people. You just have to hand it over to the Russians as part of the negotiations. And if Russia wants to continue the war, are they just going to steamroll it? Are they just going to destroy an entire city of 700,000 people? Destroy every building, kill every person? That would take months. I mean, they took Mariupol at full strength, and it took them weeks or even months to get that city. So it would be protracted and brutal. Obviously, the media is still going to be covering the war every day, and if Trump cuts off aid and the Russians keep going, it would just drag on forever just to get the city of Zaporizhia.
But wouldn't
Um,
that make Trump arm Ukraine even more? Isn't that something that
that's
Ukraine would
that's
want?
that's the threat. I mean, that's General Keith Kellogg's idea, and Trump likes that kind of thinking. So I think General Kellogg understands how to speak to and work with Trump, and give him options that he can say, I can sell this to my base, because Trump really cares about his supporters. Like, he loves being loved by the people who love him, and he
Mm.
wants to get a win. Like Donald, he's mentioned this a couple times, but Donald Trump is really interested in getting a Nobel Peace Prize. He's pretty upset. He's pretty upset that Barack
Obama
Obama
got
was
it.
given one by the Europeans in 2010. And of all the awards and accomplishments Trump has gotten over his life, he's never gotten a Nobel Peace Prize. So I do think there's some part of him that genuinely is motivated by something so stupid. So
I Yeah. Sorry. Finish your thought.
Well, broader, go back to your question. Does Putin want to continue, or does Putin want to stop? Uh, he might choose to continue if he doesn't think, if he thinks the United States will just abandon Ukraine and then not flip the switch and then provide even more overwhelming aid. Like, that's the threat. And if it's a empty threat, Putin's going to keep going. If the NATO alliance is going to completely cut off and abandon Ukraine, then Putin has no incentive, no fear of stopping.
Mm.
The war will drag on for months beyond the point the United States cuts it off. It's going to be horrendous for the international community to watch. So what if the United States is serious? What if Trump is serious about providing even more military aid if the Russians won't negotiate? Well, even then, I think Putin can still view that as a win, because you just freeze the current conflict and then start, Russifying the territories you've taken, consolidate, start pumping out tanks and missiles, and get ready to start the conflict again when you think you're ready in 4 or 5 years. Putin is only 71 or 72, and unfortunately, he looks like he's in good health. So if he wants to come back for round two in 4 or 5 years, he thinks that's still a good option for him. To do this, though, he has to keep Ukraine out of NATO. It's his number one priority. The Russians have no fear of ever being attacked by NATO. They know
Mm.
NATO would never attack them. But once a country becomes part of NATO, then you can't steal their land. It's all about reconstituting the Russian Empire. So Putin is viewing both options as positives and negatives. And I think Putin is willing to do either one, whichever one serves him better.
So he has to make a judgment call. So he has to work out whether Trump will increase the US's aid to Ukraine or not. And once he has made that decision, he can't back down. He's not going to sue for peace or beg for a ceasefire if Trump ups the aid. So I guess that's the $1 million question. Is he going to believe Trump that he's going to arm Ukraine to the teeth or not? I guess that's the question.
Some aspects of MAGA, when they try to frame the debate, it gets pretty stupid. And I could see a scenario where Trump says we're going to cut off all military aid, and then he just says it's over. We don't have to pay attention to this anymore. Like, the war will still be going on. European countries will still be supporting Ukraine. Ukraine will still be fighting. But every day, Donald Trump will just say, isn't it great? The war is over. It's done. We don't have to talk or think about this
Do you
anymore.
think he's going to do that? I don't think he'd be able to wash his hands so cleanly, so quickly.
There
I
are
don't think
still
so.
going to be people like me talking about the conflict every day, telling my subscribers, please phone and email the White House and tell them this is a serious problem that we need to address in the world. But yeah, I mean, if right wing media here in the United States goes radio silent and they say under no circumstances talk about Ukraine or Russia at all ever, then the vast majority of Americans, the issue will just disappear for them.
No, but
If Elon
CNN,
Musk,
MSNBC, I mean, the most of the US media is
those
left
people
leaning or
didn't
pro
vote for
Ukraine.
Trump. That's not Trump's base.
So,
Trump's not trying to be president of all of America. Trump is president of the people who voted for him. Trump is the first president, probably in the history of the United States, maybe since Andrew Jackson, who says, "I am only the president of people who voted for me."
he did
For
say, well,
everyone else,
I'm president of everyone. He did say that.
have you seen his tweets? Did you see his Thanksgiving tweet in which he said, I mean, I can pull it up for you. These are not unifying statements. He is still openly hostile towards anybody who didn't vote for him or support him. Now, he's willing to accept you. If you want to convert to MAGA, if you want to be a convert at any moment, he will forgive you. Just this week, we got video of Pete Hegseth, his nominee for Secretary of Defense, trashing Trump in 2017 on Fox News. Like, everyone that Trump is appointing to his administration at one point in the last 10 years was anti-Trump. So Trump is okay with this. Like, if you have said anything critical about him in the past, he'll ignore it as long as you're saying nice things about him today. But if you're hostile to him, oh, he's gonna punish you. That's just how he thinks and operates.
Which is why I actually tweeted a few months ago, coupled with Trump's desire to win a Nobel Prize. I said, well, Zelensky should just kiss Trump's ass for a little bit, name a few streets after Trump, and erect a monument in Kyiv for Trump. I think Trump will say, "Here it is. What do you want?" So I don't think he'd be so easily be able to walk away. I mean, there would still be so many people around him who would say that if we abandon Ukraine, these are the consequences.
Can we rename the town of Zaporizhia to New Trump City?
Trump grad. It's just,
Can we open
yeah,
a Trump University on the north bank of the Dnipro River?
we probably could. I don't know. No, he would love it. I mean, that
Well,
would be one way to get through to him.
we're making jokes, but this actually is the winning formula. And Zelensky and the Ukrainians are already there. Prior to the election, former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson was making all of these flattering statements towards Trump, saying Trump's going to be fantastic for Ukraine. Trump is going to help us defeat the Russians. And at the time, I was like, why is Boris Johnson talking like this? But I think he was approached by members of the government in the UK saying, we need a contingency plan. We need somebody who is talking up Trump, giving him aspirational goals to live up to. And if he wins, because, foreign governments and NATO didn't know if Harris or Trump were going to win. If Trump wins, then you can be the guy. You can be the Trump whisperer. So former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson now looks like a genius for
And even Nigel
saying,
Farage, he's not that big a voice, but he's very pro Trump. And
well, isn't he pro Russia though? Like, Boris Johnson's pro Ukraine.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the Reform Party is not friendly to Ukraine, to the best of my understanding.
They're not pro Russia though, but they are of the same view that why are we spending so much money in this losing conflict? So yeah. But he could get through to Trump, or at least that's what the British are hoping for. Now let's talk a little bit about ordinary Ukrainians. How I believe you're in touch with them. You speak to a lot of Ukrainians. How are they coping with this war? Because it has dragged on for nearly 3 years. A lot of people have died. This is a brutal war with no end in sight. Well, we're hoping. I think Zelensky said that this will be the final year, 2025. Is there a fatigue kicking in? And people, I remember seeing a poll in August or September where the vast majority of Ukrainians were still of the view that we need to get every inch back from Russia. But is this changing?
I can't empathize. Like, I've never lived in a country that's being bombed every single night.
Mm.
What the Russians are doing is deliberate. It is a form of psychological warfare, launching these drones every single night. You don't know where the drones exactly are going, so you have to send out the text alerts to everybody saying there's drones in the sky or there's planes taking off. You need to go underground, take shelter. So it is about, I mean, it's been going for 3 years and the Ukrainian people haven't submitted, they haven't broken. But yeah, it's torment, it's torture. They're going to be dealing with the psychological effects of this war and surviving it for generations basically. But I think the people of Ukraine understand that this is their moment in time for real independence. Ukraine was subjugated by the Russian Empire 300 years ago. They signed a treaty as a counterbalance to the Polish Commonwealth. So they did marry into this alliance with the Kremlin, but they want out. It's not been beneficial. Given the genocides, the millions of people who died during the famines of the 1920s and 30s, the Soviet Union basically dragged them into World War II. They were always going to get attacked by the Germans, but the Soviets did nothing really, I think, in the first year of that war to protect or help or spare the Ukrainians. Anytime Ukrainians died, the Russian czars viewed this as a win because if they can depopulate an area, they can move in proper Russians loyal to the czar. The Ukrainians have always been um, a weak point for the Russians because they do have their own history, they do have their own culture, their own language. This myth of Slavic brotherhood is Kremlin propaganda that's been put out for centuries. So the people of Ukraine know this is their opportunity. If they want real democracy, if they want real prosperity, they're looking at their neighbors, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. And those are really nice places to live now. If you got into the EU and you got into NATO 30 years ago, you're doing pretty well. But if you stayed in Russia's sphere of influence, countries like Moldova and Belarus, you didn't take a great leap forward. You don't have as nice of a living standard as they do in the European Union. So this is their opportunity, and they're willing to fight and die for it. For people who say, "I just want the killing to stop," Americans saying this, I'm sorry, but Americans wouldn't accept what the Russians are offering the Ukrainians right now. They'd be willing to fight and die for it. I'd be willing to fight and die for it if somebody was bombing my city every night and
Or
and
took
and
20% of
and
my
trying to
country.
stealing my land. Yeah, yeah.
Which is why I've always said to all those Putin simps or sympathizers that why is it that every former Soviet satellite state wants to join the West? We don't see Canada and Mexico lining up to join Russia's camp. Final point, final question, actually. So we've seen how Russia meddles in its neighboring countries' democratic process. It's petrified of these countries joining the West. And the latest episode is unfolding in Georgia. Quick word on that. What's happening there? Where's it going to go? Is Putin likely to open another front?
Russia invaded Georgia in 2008 because Georgia wanted real democratic reforms. They wanted real economic prosperity. Going back to the 2000s, once again, Georgia saw what Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia achieved, and they said, we want that too. And if you're a country directly on Russia's border, Russia says, no, you're our satellite state. We pick your leaders. We control your economy and resources. Georgia's tiny. It's less than 4 million people. They don't have great geography. And the Russians have been occupying 20% of their country for almost 17, 16 years or whatever. So what's happening right now with the protests? Realistically, for Georgia to ever be free, Ukraine has to win. Like, if you care about Georgia in any way, then you need to be supporting Ukraine. If Ukraine can militarily win on the battlefield, cause enough economic and political strife in Russia that Russia has some kind of collapse, then Georgia can finally be free. But I think for the ruling Russia Dream Party, the Georgian Dream Party that's pro-Russian, they're willing to take the money and they're willing to take the path of least resistance to just stay in power and keep some level of autonomy. Like, I'm sure the people in Georgia's government who are serving the Russians think that they're sparing their own population. If they were openly hostile, then the Russian military would come for them. They'd kill them, they'd level their cities, and they'd take the land by force. If the Western coalition and alliance won't even back Ukraine when there's a direct rail line to Kyiv from Poland, then isolated Georgia has no hope.
Mm. Well, on that note, I hope that Trump ups the aid for Ukraine. And then one good thing out of that would be to see the look on the faces of all those MAGA people who've been simping for Putin. But when Putin turns on Trump, I want to see how they turn on Putin in return. That's going to
But
be interesting.
here's the thing: if Trump turns on Putin, then everybody who supports Trump, especially here in the United States, will also turn on Putin.
Exactly. That's what I want to see.
I mean, if Trump says this is what we're doing now, then these people just go along with it. Why? Let's ignore that. But I do think there's an argument there. I think there are people like General Keith Kellogg and people like Mike Waltz and even people like Senator Lindsey Graham who are talking to Trump saying, you've never had a better opportunity. Trump is all about his own ego. And if you want to level the Russians, humble the Russians, finish Russia off, be greater than Reagan. Can we say that expression? If you want to be greater than Reagan, Mr. Trump,
Mm.
then just finish them off. Russia, the weaker Russia is, and we've got 51 days to weaken Russia even more. Trump's going to see it. He's going to be explained how bad their economy is, how they can't even recapture the territory in Kursk. And somebody's going to make the persuasive argument. Just finish them off. I think things need to get worse for Russia, and Russia needs to be broken up. Belarus should be its own independent sovereign country of about 10 million people. So with Russia, the Russian Federation being 140 million, you can make that 14 Belarus-sized countries, each of about 10 million people. And then we're done with this. We're done with this stupid empire, always trying to re-put itself back together. This is what the Russians have been doing for 500 years. Russia is the world's last empire, and we need to decolonize Central Asia, decolonize the Far East, decolonize the Caucasus and Eastern Europe. This has to stop. There's no reason to just keep allowing this concentration in the Kremlin to keep repeating, because it leads to wars. It leads to instability.
Isn't that a bit too hawkish? First of all, that would strengthen China even more because they'll take the outer Manchuria. And secondly, how can we ensure that different factions with nukes vying for power in Russia becoming unstable, wouldn't that be pretty catastrophic?
The realization or the point you just made is Jake Sullivan's position. Jake
Yeah.
Sullivan, the last 3 years, has done everything he can to prevent Russia from collapsing because he came to the final calculation that loose nukes in Russia, regional warlords and governors fighting with each other over gas fields and diamond mines and mineral deposits with nuclear weapons is the ultimate nightmare scenario.
Mhm.
And my answer is, well, there's that path, which isn't a good one, or there's the alternate path where Russia wins and nuclear deterrence from the NATO alliance fails. If nuclear deterrence fails, and what Russia is doing today, no country has ever done before. Putin talking about historical lands and historical claims is saying, let me take this, otherwise I'll nuke you. I'll nuke you in Berlin. I'll nuke you in Paris. I'll nuke you in London. This is nuclear blackmail, and this is intolerable. Putin is the one forcing this situation, not us. NATO aggression had nothing to do with this. NATO expansion had nothing to do with this. Putin just wants his empire back. Bottom line, it's a land grab. He wants to redraw the maps. So if nuclear deterrence fails and a nuclear state is allowed to succeed with this, that's the ultimate checkmate. Nuclear weapons are never going away. And from now until the rest of time, we have a positive example for a dictator to get back historical lands just by threatening to nuke democratic nations. So if Putin succeeds today, this isn't the end of it. China is going to invade their neighbors, saying, don't interfere, don't get in my way, otherwise I'll nuke you. North Korea could start military engagements, threatening to nuke people. Other dictators around the world will immediately want nukes because that's apparently the cheat code in which you can't be defeated. And every small country in the world that no longer trusts France, the United Kingdom, and the United States, those are the three democratic powers with nuclear weapons. Finland needs nukes, Poland needs nukes, Australia needs nukes, Japan needs nukes, South Korea needs nukes. And we're back to the problem we had in the Cold War with nuclear proliferation. the more countries, the more scientists, the more laboratories where this technology is being proliferated, the more dangerous the world will become over the next 30, 50, 100 years. So the nightmare scenario that Jake Sullivan is afraid of, there's an equally bad one, might even potentially be worse if Russia succeeds today.
Yeah. But we know that Putin is not likely to launch a nuclear war. I mean, it's all been bluff and bluster. And with each threat and him not pulling the trigger, he further waters down his nuclear threats.
I agree. There's no benefit. I mean, there's nowhere on the map in the world where Russia can just drop one nuke and then all of a sudden the situation for Russia will get better. It
The
won't.
threat
It'll get,
of the threat of nuclear attack is more powerful than the actual attack.
yes. But what if,
Still happen. Yeah.
somebody in like some authoritarian in South, Maduro in Venezuela, or various countries in Africa or Southeast Asia, like
Well, Kim Jong Un, he's the most likeliest, nut job.
every democracy in the world is always one election away from becoming a fascist government where they're not a democracy anymore. And then you're at the whims of the crazy guy in charge. Things get weird. Like dictators are very weird people. And when you've been in absolute power of your sovereign territory for decades, I don't know, you get a little weird, and maybe those people will not be as rational as Putin is today.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you very much for your insightful thoughts and commentary. Keep doing what you're doing. And guys, as I said before, Jake's fundraiser is still on. Like and share this video. As I said, any money that's raised from this video will go directly to Jake's fundraiser for Ukrainian defenders. And I will match that up to $1,000. And hopefully we'll have good news when Trump gets in that Oval Office. Jake, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for your time. Any last words?
Keep supporting Ukraine. Russia does not have much time left in them. They're projecting strength, but it's all fake bravado. Russia is incredibly weak right now, and we just need to finish them off.
On that note, until next time, Tala. Slava Ukraini.
Glory to the heroes.
If you'd like to support my work, you can become my patron by going to patreon.com/Sultan, or you can simply buy me a coffee.